gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome back to the conference and the panel on the Sustainable Digital Identity System. I'm very pleased to be today in Estonia. This is my third time, and I have to say that first time was only 3 years ago, but this is how I did my crash course on identity management. I've always worked in technologies, but didn't know much about governmental identity, and within 3 days, when I left Estonia, I understood, it's a kind of revelation. I understood the whole purpose of digital identity. And this is really key. I mean, as we've heard already this morning, the World Bank has estimated that there are 1.3 billion people who are not registered, who have no proof of identity in the world. And this is a real obstacle for full participation, in the formal world, economic, social, political. And for the state, it's the same. If you can't identify your citizen, I mean, you cannot perform basic services, and you cannot get the statistics and the data you need to develop your policies. We've seen it this morning. I mean, digital identity, which is only a little piece in the whole e-governance, is actually fundamental. Without digital identity, you cannot build e-governance system. And this is one of the SDG goal 16.9, which is legal identity by 2030 for every person in the world, including birth registration. But I won't go into the detail because we have a presentation by Minerva Novero-Belek from UNDP who will go into the detail of that in a minute. Before I hand over to Minerva and introduce you to the other members of the panel, I just want to say a few words on Secure Identity Alliance. Secure Identity Alliance is a network of public, private, and non-governmental organizations. Our objective is really to share best practice, or should I say, learning from mistakes after this morning, and really, advocate and promote the use of trusted digital identity, because the way you set up a digital identity has to be done in a certain way. We publish regular, and I have to say that e-Governance Academy is one of our advisory members. We publish all kind of reports, studies, which you can download from our website. They're free for downloads. But we also participated in a project which Minerva will detail, which is the principles. As we've seen this morning, as we said, there's not one model that you can deploy everywhere in the world. Each country has its own model, but there's a lot of shared principles. And coordinated by the World Bank ID4D initiative, together alongside 19 other organizations, we've published back in February a set of principles which you can download from those 19 organization websites, but also the World Bank one. UNDP was part of this initiative. Thank you. I will now, shall I invite all the panel to come and sit, or do you want to start, Minerva, first, and then we'll, please. I'll hand over to Minerva Novero-Belek, who is senior policy at the UNDP. Please. And then we'll call the rest of the panel after. Yeah?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Stephanie, Excellencies, organizers of the event, distinguished guests, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here. Stephanie actually stumbled on two identities thereby inadvertently. I'm Minerva Novero, which is my maiden name. I'm also Minerva Novero-Belek, Belek, which is my married name. So when I was applying for a passport in my new home, the United States, I learned that certain agencies don't take hyphens. So Novero-Belek, which is my legal married name, does not exist in certain agencies. So I have to carry two IDs with me, which shows my maiden name and my married name. So legal identity. First, let me go back to that because it's actually the anchor that we have here. E-identity, the development imperative to leave no one behind. So from the title itself, we can immediately appreciate that there's more to e-identity than just the application of smart technology or new technologies or ICTs in making identity real. So identity for all, 16.9, as Stephanie has noted. This is a huge debate going on now on what exactly that constitutes. Let's go back to, well, before we go back to the principles, let's go through what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes, and hopefully I keep to the time. Stephanie, you will, of course, signal me. Let's go over legal identity as a development imperative. Greatly understood, probably, but appreciated in various ways by various ministries. E-identity and the SDGs. Why do we care about e-identity in the achievement of the 2030 agenda? And then let's go through some key trends and applications. We will focus more on this third, and I will not go so much into the detail of country experiences and expertise that is available across regions, because we actually have our experts from the countries themselves on the panel as well. And then way forward, and here we will need to have hopefully some engagement down the line after our interventions in this presentation. So, terms, issues, and relevance. Identity, we know what identity is. This is what distinguishes you, the characteristics that sets you apart from all the others. So it could be your gender, it could be your personality, your whatever is unique about you. Legal identity, that's something else. You may have identity under the sun in front of your eyes, in front of your mirror, but are you a legal identity in front of legal authorities, particularly your government, public institutions? So as we usually read in various literature, there is no universal agreement on what constitutes legal identity. Every country varies on what they consider as a legal identity to themselves. But we always lean on the fundamental principles, which is as embodied in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. So here, the Human Rights Declaration states that everybody has a right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. So you have rights. By virtue of human being, you have a right. It is a human right. International Convention on Civil Political Rights, UN Convention on the Rights of a Child, that confers the child the right to be recognized also, that to be registered after birth. And there are certain ways on how this is applied. And the agency, in fact, the leading agency on this would be UNICEF. So, legal IDs. This discussion, by the way, is not about these three. We will not debate about these three. These are just foundations to recall ourselves on what we lean on when we talk about the identity. Legal IDs. Once again, there's no uniform or universal definition of what constitutes as legal ID. You go from country to country, it differs. These are instruments, mechanisms, protocols, and standards on what you can present to an agency or an entity to prove who you are, who you say you are. So in certain countries, a national ID is legal identity. It would be legal for certain transactions, but not for others. DMV, in my case, in the US, it's constituted as a state ID. I can rent a car, I can drive a car, but it will not allow me to do certain things. Social Security ID, that's a different kind of ID as well. So, development imperative, why do we care in the development community, our community? This is familiar to all, but just to recall, in 2015, the member states of the UN agreed on a very transformative agenda, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So, we had the 2015, the MDGs to be achieved with 2015. We achieved a lot, but not much. Come 2015, the successor to the MDGs is far more ambitious, from 8 goals to 17. 169 targets within the 17 goals. the 17 goals are supposed to leave no one behind. It's a principle that is at the heart of the 2030 agenda. So when you go into goal 16, which is peace, justice, and strong institutions, we have 16.9, which is about ensuring identity for all, including birth registration. Why do we care? As Stephanie has said, this seems to be a minor target in itself. Of the 169, only one. And people might think that this doesn't concern them. This is, my agency doesn't have to be concerned about registering children after birth or immediately after birth. But from this flows all the rights that give you to obviously access services, access information, talk to the courts, lodge complaints, talk to your government, vote, get a loan, get financial assistance, get an education, have access to opportunities. So why goal 16? Why is it there? And this is one of the things that is so revolutionary about the 2030 agenda, that we have a goal 16 in a global accord, which is about peace and justice, about anti-corruption, about making institutions transparent, effective, equitable, and so on. And it resides there because all of this is deeply connected to who you are and what rights you have before your government, before the law, in society, in financial institutions, and so on. So from there also we can connect, if we look at the targets of Goal 16, anti-corruption, participation, empowerment, making illicit financial flows, to stop trafficking, and so on and so forth. This flows from what right you have to be at the table. What right do you have to define your society, the kind of government you will have? So 16.9, Goal 16, revolutionary. And with that, we can already start to think on how it can help achieve all the other SDGs. We always say that the entire 2030 agenda is supposed to be indivisible, universal, applies to all countries. It's not just a set of goals that developing countries need to achieve. All countries are in this together, unlike the MDGs. And unlike the MDGs, we are now supposed to achieve this ambitious agenda in its entirety. So there's no cherry picking. There are experts in this room on e-identity, experts in this room in cybersecurity, e-governance, e-government. So you might automatically link yourself to a specific target in the 17 goals. But we are supposed to deliver on the entire set in its entirety, so no cherry picking. So 16.9, we might focus on it here, but it's very integrated and integral to what we need to do from now till 2030. The challenge is quite significant, in fact, very significant in many parts. There are identification gaps, not identity gaps, if I might underline, because as we said earlier, we will recall everybody has an identity, but is that recognized, is it legal, before especially government. So birth registration varies a great deal. You see the chart in front of us. And this is from UNICEF, which is our agency leading on this effort. So the difference across regions is quite significant. And from here, you can start already thinking about what could be going into what challenges these countries might be responding to when it comes to registering birth. How could that be so difficult? Registering birth. Well, in many cases, or in certain, the rural registration is quite low compared to the urban. And it doesn't take much imagination to understand some of the specifics and the implications. In the urban areas, many people are giving birth in hospitals, or the mechanisms are in place, automatic registration. In rural areas, that might be the case. Somebody might be born in rural areas and nobody will know about it until much later, especially the government in the capital. And in certain countries, there are certain laws that actually bear on when or how you can register your child. In certain countries, only fathers can register a child. Without a father, without recognition of a father, the child can't be registered. In certain countries, there are obstacles to, say, if you're not married, parentage is questionable. So there are certain things that are hindering what we might perceive as quite an easy process. In certain cases, the process can be difficult, inaccessible, and so on. So we have some countries that are facing specific and significant challenges. Some of the colleagues are here from some countries, and we look forward to hearing from you on these challenges and opportunities. So e-identity and the SDGs. What are our perspectives on this? As I've already said, it's fundamental to the achievement of your right as a human being. And with that, when it comes to development, it is connected to your right to access basic services, education, health, jobs. And we might think that, fine, no access to education, that should be really concerning us, because when you think that in most likelihood, those that have difficulties when it comes to birth registration are already the most behind. They are poor, they're in remote areas, or maybe later on we'll touch on this, in urban areas, in cities, but invisible, living in slums, marginalized, maybe because of ethnic or other kinds of group identifications. So when you consider that from the start, you have somebody who is not visible, invisible, unable to access, especially education. In many schools, birth certificate is a requirement to access universal education. But then again, when you think that this right, this primary right, is denied, this sets the individual further behind within the community, within the society, and the rest of the world. And we're talking about millions here. And the World Bank estimate at one point is 1.5 billion in identity gaps, identification gaps. I think it's now 1.1 by the end of 2016. So I think a reference in the former slide, which I can't get to, that we have approaches now and examples of how we do e-identity. So the potential of e-identity to advance SDGs, as we've said, we are focusing on 16.9 as a goal in itself. But from SDG 1 to SDG 17, anti-poverty, anywhere you see universal access, access to this, access to that, think right away of 16.9. How are you going to make sure that that access is real, that the access is possible, and that it's meaningful, and it can deliver all the benefits that you expect from that access? So EID, the use of ICTs in making this identity, legal identity, and legal IDs possible. Estonia stands as a model. I will not speak much on Estonia because we have Estonia, we will be speaking on that in a bit. And India, Kenya, Nigeria, I think the literature is full of the examples of this. And we have colleagues from these countries who will speak on these as well. But for discussion later on, please bear those countries in mind. Beyond technology, it's not just about ICTs and making identity possible. As we've said, it's a legal right. When we talk about exclusion, it's not just about ICTs. When we talk about recognition before the law, it's not just about ICTs, but ICTs can help a great deal in making legal identity and legal identification possible. So, as Stephanie has noted earlier, there is an effort spearheaded by the World Bank, the ID4D, in making sure that there is agreement and coherence in understanding, first of all, among the UN agencies on what we mean by e-identity. And they have developed in the course of a few years and lead up to the adoption of the 2030 Agenda in 2015, principles on identification. These are not rules, they're not binding, but they serve to guide, and you will see on the screen the agencies and the entities that have been involved in this process. So what do they entail? Three organizations or categorizations of the principles: inclusion, design, and governance. So the principles are there when it comes to inclusion. Universal coverage and accessibility obviously is key. What use is EID if it's not accessible to all. Obviously, when we talk about e-governance and e-government and so on and so forth, the principle of accessibility is built in, and universal access is built in, equitable access. So design, we talked about open source, we talked about proprietary software and so on and so forth, but there are other things as well that are technology rooted, but not entirely. So that has something to be addressed when you come to design your e-identity efforts. Governance. Governance is a big part of all of this. Even we noted it earlier, technology is not neutral, but much of what we do, technology is a lot to do with how we govern our use or what we put it to use for when it comes to e-identity. Key trends. E-identity, achievement of the 2030 Agenda, it's very clear. We can't achieve, or we can't even mark or even progress on all the goals if we don't have this in place. So it's critical, it's fundamental. And key trends are unfolding at the moment that will have a bearing on our work in this area. And this is something that in wherever I go, I try to introduce, because you know what you need to know when it comes to ICTs, e-governance and e-government. You are the experts in this room. In certain areas, your expertise is not widely understood in other areas, especially in an area like crisis response, urbanization. And let me touch on those two. Rapid urbanization. Why should we care about rapid urbanization in this theme? The UN projects that by 2050, a great deal of the population will be living in urban areas. And rapid urbanization will happen mainly in Africa and Asia. The countries or the regions where we now see significant challenges, including in identity. We have reached the threshold that we're not going to go back from in 2014. We are now mainly urban. So when you talk about e-identity, even for us in UNDP, the people that we serve, most of them will be living in cities. That changes a lot on the way we do things. Consider what's going on in cities at the moment, especially rapidly urbanizing. A lot of people come to the cities to seek jobs, opportunities. A lot of the refugees and the displaced come to the cities. They don't go to areas where there are no opportunities. So they attach a lot of benefits to coming to the cities. And municipal governments, local governments are currently under duress in responding to a lot of the stresses. So there are a lot of areas that we need to think about when we talk about urbanization. And I was in Quito. I'm the focal point for urbanization in UNDP. And the new urban agenda was adopted in Quito in October. It was quite a revelation, because a lot of the areas that are involved in urbanization, you would think that they would touch on this. They talked about slums, they talked about exclusion, they talked about who is not visible in a rapidly urbanizing global south. And there is no next step. How do we recognize those who are coming to the city, who we believe also have a right to the city? If we talk about city for all, what do we do about the invisible in the slums? Currently in probably 1 billion around the world, and many of them in poor countries struggling already with development challenges. Migration and displacement, also going to cities. Countries that are close to conflict areas are bearing the burden of hosting the refugees, the displaced. A lot of people are coming to Europe, but a great deal of the displaced are going to the likes like Uganda. Uganda in March 2017, I'm noting here that the Lebanon hosted the largest number. That's still true. But in March 2017, this statistic changed. In 2017, this year, in March this year, Uganda, if I'm not saying it correctly, hopefully colleagues from Uganda can share their insights on this, are hosting the largest number of refugees coming from South Sudan. And this is a country that has opened its doors, community that has opened its arms to people fleeing conflict and famine and so on. But these are countries, Uganda and the rest, they're already facing challenges of their own. So we had a talk earlier that governments are not doing this, not doing that, government not listening to the people. But we also have to wonder. We work a lot with governments. Governments are our partners. Wherever you go in the developing global south, governments are already experiencing a lot of stresses, responding to a lot of challenges. Responding to the 2030 agenda aspirations is not an easy task. So the role of Estonia, the model being called in Estonia, the e-governance academy and the expertise around this room, you are needed. You can have that expertise, the insights that developing countries and all countries for that matter can really lean on. So people at risk of being left behind. When we talk about the identity, let's not think only of those who are in rural areas. Automatically, they come to mind when we talk about those who are left behind. Let us also start to think about how we can address the challenges unique to those who are being left behind right in our midst, in our cities, the invisible ones, those living in the slums. Do we even know how many they are, who they are? Do they have access to the things that they need to live a dignified life? And the migrants, the displaced, the refugees, they are also at risk of being left behind. In fact, they are already left behind. These are people who lost homes. In many cases, the refugees in Syria, for instance, in Jordan, left everything. Their identification card, their family books on which everything or every family member is listed. They don't have individual IDs, but they have a family book. You lose it, and you're basically at a loss on how to prove yourself as a refugee. And from there flows all the other things that can open up opportunities for you. Already left behind and further at risk of being left behind. So e-identity can serve a great deal in responding to this goal of 16.9 and all the other goals. So way forward. There's a lot of things that we can start to think about to make sure that our e-identity efforts actually work to serve, to pull those who are left behind into the fold. Governments need to really focus on how to be strategic about this. We are talking about especially millions of children who are not registered. These are your future youth. These are the future generation. So if you consign millions of people in illiteracy, in skills that are not up to par to compete in the global economy, then you are facing a generation that is quite in danger at the moment, and facing a future where you will have a generation that is not able to take the country forward to its goals of the 20 agenda aspirations or high income status. So investments, resources, and partnerships are crucial. We see this everywhere. And we heard it quite often. Somebody was saying that if I hear that word again, I forgot what that word does, but in conferences it also comes up, multi-stakeholder. What exactly do we mean by that? And when we think about private sector, we should reframe the role of private sector in development efforts. It's not just a source of funding. Private sector is also a source of a lot of expertise. A lot of the ICT firms around here, you do the things we don't. We know development. We don't create the mobile phones. We don't create these ICT platforms. That's where you come in. And the experts in birth registration, the governments, the expertise in governance, we all need to work together, especially given the very ambitious 2030 agenda. We talked about interoperability, but one of the things that we would like to introduce here and to ask everybody to keep in mind is the interoperability of institutions as well. So we have a case of governments, of ministries with systems that don't talk to each other. But take that offline. We also have ministries that don't talk to each other when it comes to policy and planning and implementation and monitoring and so on and so forth. So when we talk about whole of government approach, there's a lot that can be done to make that real. And when we talk about the achievement of the SDGs from SDG 1 to 17, not a single agency can do that. Not a single government can do that even by itself, or an UN agency. Nobody can do that by itself. So interoperability in many layers is necessary. We talk about rapid urbanization. Interoperability, vertical, horizontal, totally absolutely necessary. Coherence among partners. The idea for the initiative is quite revolutionary in that it got the agencies together to work together on the creed principles that we just touched on. So more coherence is needed. We have seen that in the ICT for development area. So we're seeing it here again. So beyond technology, government designed for new times. So it's e-identity as a fundamental, a requisite to the achievement of all the other goals. It requires a government that can think in new ways, bold and inclusive. So this actually, in fact, revolutionizes the way we do government and the way we do governance. So a lot to think about. Being strategic, goal 16. Ambitious agenda, 16.9. Don't be tempted to think of putting all efforts in 16.9 by itself. Accelerators, bottlenecks. There's a way that we're trying to help or assist or work with governments now in making sure that the 2030 agenda efforts or implementation are coherent and strategic. So in focusing on goal 16, you also could, in fact, advance all the other goals. In fact, we believe that we can advance the entire 2030 agenda through goal 16 because there can be no peace without development, no development without peace. Institutions are critical at all layers and all goals. But it's more than that. Goal 16 and goal 16.9 especially, when it comes to the goals and the squares, very directly relevant. So with that, I leave you the thought, e-identity, transformation, key to leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minerva. I'm going to invite on stage our panel. Minerva, if you want to come and sit down. Mr. Lloyd Waller, chairman of e-Jamaica Limited. Please come up. Bernard Morvan from SOFI, a member of the Secure Identity Alliance, and Marie Pedac, who is a senior expert consultant and was in the team that established the Estonian e-identity. So I'd like to first start with you, Lloyd, and ask you a few questions, because I know Jamaica is working on its EID scheme.
Yes.
So I had a few questions for you, because you...
Okay.
I wanted, maybe you want to say first, maybe introduce yourself and say a few words on the program.
Okay, well, my name is Lloyd Waller. I'm the chair or head of the Department of Government at the University of the West Indies. I am an academic, and my primary area of research is governance, democratic governance, good governance, and my secondary area of research is statistics and qualitative and quantitative research methods and the theory and philosophy of research methods. So I typically observe issues in governance, governance structures, governance systems, governance processes, individuals and tools. And within the context of the last part, which is tools, I have been theoretically exploring e-governance as a tool that can change systems, linking the whole entire theoretical argument that good governance leads to economic development and achieving good governance can be made possible through ICTs, I have been observing and doing research in this instance. In the last 2 years, however, I have been given the opportunity to work with the government of Jamaica to transfer my theoretical knowledge to looking at and actually being involved at the policy level as it relates to e-governance in Jamaica. And I was asked by the Minister of Energy, Science and Technology to sit as at the chair of eGov Jamaica Limited. And eGov Jamaica Limited is actually the organization in Jamaica that is responsible for the ICT infrastructure of the country. It has evolved from different iterations, but what it is right now is that particular activity. eGov Jamaica Limited has, and the government of Jamaica has several projects, one of which is the National Identification System, NIDS. The NIDS program itself is a secure, unique, reliable identification system that is going to be established to ensure that each Jamaican's identity is secured and each Jamaican has an identity. Interestingly so, coincidentally so, surprisingly so, the gentleman in charge of the NIDS program is sitting right here. And I just learned that today. It's strange to come as far as Europe and engage the person responsible for the program. Currently, Jamaica doesn't have one identification system. As a matter of fact, we have different identification systems running on different platforms that don't speak to each other. So, for example, and you can imagine, based on the conversation you had earlier when you spoke about the developmental implications of such a system, there is a bit of urgency by the government of Jamaica to try to see how best to implement this program. One thing I'm sure you didn't, Minerva, you didn't mention, which is the part of development that we don't really like to talk about in the developing world, is the implications of not having this single identification system when it comes to one of the most critical pillars of democracy, which is voting, because it threatens, in some instances, voter fraud in not being able to track and monitor the voting system. And currently, we are in the final processes of implementing the NIDS program, right?
Yes.
Okay. by early 2018. All right.
Thank you, Lloyd.
I'm holding him accountable now.
We'll do a tennis exchange then. Bernard, you've been advising on the project. What would you say is really interesting in terms of, I'm scared to say the word best practices.
No, let's go for it. Let's go for it.
Mistake not to be repeated.
Now, we'll not use, the word best practices. I wanted, in fact, to call it, 16.9 objective at work, which maybe, will be a better positioning. In fact, back to the comment of Lloyd, I'm advising, my position, first of all, my name is Bernard Morvan, so I work for a consulting company, Sophie, based in France, which means the only thing I do, more or less in France, I pay my taxes because I'm doing projects, throughout, the year, whether in Africa or the Caribbean region. So advising government authorities on how to implement, best practices of identity management from re-engineering of civil registry system, to a national ID system, like the one of, the state of Jamaica. So my role, in fact, in this project is advising the team that, I was asked to put in place so that they can do a good job and deliver, the project in early 2018. So what I would like to share with you, again, is a number of direction that we have used, for this project, which for me are relevant because these are things I've done also in other countries. And I will touch upon one also which has to do also with Estonia. First of all, I will again relate to one of the intervention of this morning, which was the we factor. In fact, I'm part of the we factor because this project in Jamaica has been possible so far with the excellent partnership developed between the state of Jamaica and one specific development bank, which is IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, which, as you may know, is also very active, especially in the Caribbean region. So when you work in this type of project, again, back to what was said this morning, I don't have the impression to be the lonesome cowboy, the consultant versus IDB versus, the office of the Prime Minister I work for. We all work together, towards this very aggressive goal. So that's, again, the first thing I wanted to share with you. The second one, and this is for me extremely also important, is that I was lucky enough to work here in a country where the Prime Minister in person, is a sponsor of the project, and he has a very clear vision of what he wants to achieve, on this project by providing a unique and trusted identity to every single citizen, in Jamaica. And he has been explaining to, all his staff, back, Minerva, to your point, that you need also to make sure that all your direct reports, ministries, agency, organization, understand what is at work. You say, no, even today, we don't know everything about Jamaicans. So how do we want, to develop, the school system, the hospital system, if we don't know exactly what are the needs? So yes, it starts with a card, with a unique ID number, but it goes far beyond that in terms of also social and financial inclusion. The important aspect also is that what is considered at this stage is what I called an integrated identity management solution for the country. In the concept of identity management, this is something I have to explain over and over. Minerva touched quickly on it. There is a concept of what I call, or what the Secure Identity Alliance call, foundational identity versus functional identity. And this is a concept which is very important to understand, because sometimes people are confused. They say, but why do you want to spend so much money on creating a new ID document or number? Because we have already a passport. I was again in a discussion recently in Kingston, with different groups where I was asked the question. And then obviously my response was, first of all, obviously that the passport, the first function is to travel, is not to establish your legal identity. And why do you want the citizen to pay so much money to acquire a passport, whereas he could have, an ID card, for free? So it's good, to say that you want to do an integrated identity management system. However, then you have to apply directly, some change management approach. Because what it does, I made the recommendation, for example, to change, the supervision of the civil registry organization, which is called over there RGD, Registrar General Department. And it was last year under the supervision of the Ministry of Health. And I found, in terms of best practice, I consider it's a true best practice, that it was better to collocate it with the new agency, which will be, in charge of managing the identity of the citizen. I presented, this recommendation to the Prime Minister, and in a matter of seconds, he said, Bernard, let's go and do it. This person is a real-time thinker, so he doesn't need to go through many different committees, and so that's what he did. Because I found already from a governance standpoint, that was, a better practice to have all the key stakeholders related to identity under the same roof, and then also to have also all the system related, to the activity within, again, an organization, which, by the way, will be eGov Jamaica. But I started, again, back to your point, Minerva, with the governance structure first, before attacking, again, the ICT component. Lloyd, you wanted to add something?
Well, there's something that you said, that you said over and over, but not explicitly. Leadership. It's a critical component in achieving any e-governance goal. And back in 2006, when I was completing my PhD, when I went for my defense, New Zealand, I got a phone call from Andrew Holness, who at the time wasn't the Prime Minister of Jamaica, but he was very keen on how, because my PhD had covered ICT for development, he was very keen on learning about ICT for development. And since 2006, he and I have been engaging in opposition and as Prime Minister about the role and importance of ICTs. And that leadership, that desire, that understanding, that knowledge was very keen in terms of pushing the agenda of an e-society, of pushing all the projects, including the NEEDS project, because I am pretty much sure he can tell he's very decisive, he's very passionate about having these projects being implemented.
No, you're correct. And again, based on all the discussion and the project I'm doing, again, across Africa especially, what I found also in the last, I would say, 5-6 years now, we see a new generation, in power, also in the government. When we talked this morning about the difficulty of talking about, these type of topics, to the diplomats and the political, representative. It's true, but I'm very optimistic that it's about to change, very quickly. I've done study recently in Ivory Coast, in Burkina Faso. I was discussing also with some representative here in Mali, and you see that again, this new generation of people who are in the business of doing, the governance of such project, they understand technology. In fact, a lot of them also have been educated, outside of Africa, in the US or New Zealand or wherever, and then they bring back, their knowledge, and they are quite good in terms of then implementing more in the startup mode, I would say, what is at stake here. Which leads me also to say that the other dimension, which is also critical for me, is also, again, here at the delivery level, the partnership with certain organizations. And before talking about the private-public partnership, I would like also to stress, the opportunity to do what I call here, in terms of better name, I call it, public-public partnership. What Jamaica is about to do, they have created this new agency to manage, this new ID program. However, there was no way that by creating, this new agency, the state of Jamaica has the resources, financial resources, to create a brand new entity with 200 people and brand new system and so forth. So obviously, what I look at was how could we reuse, or leverage, some of the existing capable, infrastructure. And that's when obviously, very quickly I came across, eGov Jamaica, which based on my evaluation was the only one who could implement a secure environment, to implement, such a new model. And then also another one was presented to me, which is the Jamaica Post, to facilitate also, the enrollment, operation, with the location. In Caribbean or in Africa, as you know, there are a number of resources which are scarce, like scarce building. And also, how do you bring also connectivity, electricity, power, to certain areas? So yes, you can use, a mobile solution, but you need still to find, places, where you can host, this type of service. And because now I've been discussing it also a number of different times, with postal organization. On one hand, I found that this postal organization, they need to re-engineer themselves and find also, new services, they can provide, to their customers, to the citizen, point one. Point two, what I found also that today in a number of countries, they are still state-owned, so you don't have any conflict between, private and public organization. And still today, the biggest strength is they have the trust of the people, and it's also the non-factor. So the postmaster in a number of countries, in fact, in certain instances also in the rural area of France, it still works. They know the people, which is something also which is very useful when you deal with identity. Yes, you have to provide documents. Yes, we capture biometric, but still the fact that the person who is in fact in front of you, knows for the person, to be enrolled, is a facilitator. So what we are about to do, in Jamaica is to combine all these strengths in a unique and integrated way, to make it happen fast. Because in fact, again, the deadline we have been given is first quarter, 2018, at the time when we are still, under tender at this point in time. By the way, I have to say that we are going through an e-procurement platform in Jamaica, so it's already there in terms of using, the ICT. The last 2 points I want to comment very quickly. Obviously, private-public partnership is important. And since the beginning, due to some prior conversation which took place, between Estonia, e-governance academy representative and the representative of the state of Jamaica, they say, well, one of the things we should do, we should also engage, the banks right away. Because out of this service, there will be one critical service which will be put in place, which will be an automated identity verification service. And obviously, the first target, are the financial institution who, due to the legislation, like in all the countries, have the need to verify identity. And we give you one specific example to show you why identity is so important. In Jamaica today, there are a number of requirements for any citizen, to open, or a person, to open a bank account. If you are a local person, you need to have two picture IDs. There is a significant percentage of the population, which is over 25%, up to 30%, who today doesn't have two picture ID. So, as I say, by construction, you already know that a third of the population cannot even apply to open a bank account. So if you think about, again, financial inclusion, here is one way, of solving it. By providing a NIN at the birth of the person, then obviously we'll be able, to operate this new service. The last point I want also to mention, and it's already here in place, is the need also of communication to the citizenship. And this is, I have to say, also something that they do quite well in Jamaica. So since the beginning, they say, yeah, we need to communicate clearly at the very beginning, also, the benefits of this new ID, to the citizenship. Because the risk, it is one risk, is that this is something which could be also perceived as something, which could threat your privacy. This is something which could be used by the police. So this is, something you want to stay away from. And the objective, obviously, is all the way around. So you need to be quite open. And I had, the privilege, just to show, what's happening, how they do it, to be involved in one of the review of the bill, which is effective right now at the Parliament with the NGOs. So the Office of the Prime Minister invited all the NGOs to comment on the bill already at this stage, before, in fact, it's discussed at the Parliament, to make sure so that already today everybody's involved and there's a voice into, the way, this project will be managed.
Thank you, Bernard. I have just one last quick question to you, Lloyd. Your identity is called Identity for Growth. What was the choice behind this name?
Well, the Ministry of Growth and Job Creation is driving the initiative. There is a recognition, again, in the Office of the Prime Minister about the connection between governance and growth and development. And NIDS is seen as a tool for this, facilitating and encouraging and strengthening good governance, because it facilitates trust, it facilitates security, efficiency, effectiveness of government, cutting costs, participation, and as well as in the rule of law. So given that kind of nexus between good governance and growth and development, and the role of the NIDS program to facilitate good governance, it's constructed and conceptualized that way.
Thank you.
I should also add, and all the good things have happened in the last 6 months, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Lloyd. Mary, it's under your leadership that the Estonian ID system was developed. What would you say? I mean, everybody talks about it as a reference model, but could you tell us what makes it so special and such a reference model?
Thank you, Stephanie. I really have had great opportunity to participate in development of Estonian EID since its beginning, and we started this work 25 years ago. And of course, we started this from development of necessary registration system of population. We implemented unique identifier, and having already good analog foundation, how it's named in World Bank report, we continued with development of EID. Our EID system was implemented in 2002, and last 15 years it has been used and changed not changed really. Why its use or unique or reference is because we have developed it as whole ecosystem, one big ecosystem, and all stakeholders have been always in picture, and government took responsibility to manage identity. What I always repeat, that EID is possible only when analog foundation is well developed, that countries can't jump into EID before everything at home or in real life is in place. But what was really important is that it was not government activity. We developed it together with private sector, and it gave good foundation for trust. Because if we are talking about identity, then the trust is key word. Because technology there, you can take all kind of solutions, but you have to build an ecosystem trusted by people. We have seen in different countries really excellent technical solutions what are not trusted by people and not used. But identity isn't something, it's just for a component of e-government architecture, and the main aim is to provide an infrastructure to provide services. And what's the best reference? The best reference, of course, is that people are using our ID card, our mobile ID, now new development, new smart ID. And people are using, more than half of population are actively using, not only adults, but retired people, children are using. That many services have reached to upper limit to 100%. I think that it's a best proof of concept. And based on the strong identity management, Estonia was implemented e-voting system in 2005, or e-residency, e-residence card to other citizens to other states. Those developments were only possible because we had really strong identity foundation. And as I already said, it's passed together with other infrastructure components, interoperability system, called X-Road, or really developed database system. All this together is good foundation to provide services. And Estonia is already, our everyday life is based on these services.
Thank you, Mari. Now you are working for the e-governance academy, sharing this expertise around the world. I had one. What is the first question you get from when you start on a project from the government interface?
Thank you. E-Governance Academy have given me an opportunity to see how other countries have done it or are doing it. And even now I am better understanding, and I can better analyze even all decisions, what we did. But first question, unfortunately, is always about technology. If I enter any country, say interested in public infrastructure, about cryptography, or already about digital signature, but usually I have to give questions about analog foundation, or do you have population register registration system in place, or for what you are developing EID, or I think that to take this general approach, we have to develop the understanding together.
Thank you, Mari. It's good. I mean, it comes back to the beginning, which is the we, and I think as we have to do a lot of communication.
Exactly, because I have always asked also what kind of mistakes we did. Now we can say, and what I always say is we little bit underestimated this awareness building really. We were sure also that if we develop excellent system, ID system or e-services system, people will start to use it immediately. Nothing happened like this. And even our private partners were more active to develop this awareness and to provide trainings and it is what we always recommended to do more than we did in Estonia.
So we did it. We need to do even more quickly because I would like to take questions in the room. Bernard, tell me, I have one last question to Minerva.
No, in fact, just to add also, one of the questions also I have very often when we start is to say, okay, so we want to do this project, and by the way, we want to go live in 6 months. No, so it's a question about the timeline. And this is where, obviously, you need, again, I don't want to add too much about how you deal with that with the politician, but you need to manage the expectation, which is critical. So if as it happened to me, in Jamaica, because I had a visit, and I say, no, we can't do it in 6 months. And then you give, what is, what you believe a reasonable time frame. But that's also, very typical. And then you go through the explanation of talking about, the objective, the governance, and finally the technology.
And in the we, I mean, Minerva has touched upon it. We've talked about government, prime minister, the different agencies. But I think one thing we need to include in the we is what you mentioned, which is local governance. Exactly. With the urbanization of the world, how do we include local government right from the start? That's maybe a question to you. How you see this collaboration?
My former team actually is part of my past in UNDP is as a policy specialist for local governance and urbanization. So especially in implementing an ambitious agenda like the 2030 agenda, the localizing the SDGs is very important because that's where impact is. And as you said, local governments, local communities know their needs best. But not all local units, local authorities, local governments are equipped for the quickly evolving challenges, complex, interlinked challenges. But we rely on local governments for a lot. So one of the things that we see when it comes to e-identity is in how we can support the local administration in building the capacities. So one of the things that we're seeing is when the initiative is top-down, and then when I know this is a room full of ministries of ICTs, but there is a greater push for deeper engagement across levels, vertical and horizontal, that this effort is not seen as an ICT project. That this is in fact a whole of government approach. It's about effectiveness, about efficiency, transparency, accountability, inclusion. But one thing that I would like to raise in this context as well is that it's not just about technology. It's very, very curious, in fact, that the first question that we receive, as our colleague from Estonia said, or eGov Academy, the first question is about technology. Because in a lot of the things that we do in ICTD, if you introduce technology in bad processes, you only got automated bad processes, right? Mm-hmm. So if you introduce ICTs and digitization in exclusionary processes, then you only get automated exclusionary processes. So in adopting innovative approaches like e-identity, this in fact presents a really good opportunity, just like we've learned in Jamaica, the model, that this is an opportunity to inspect the way we do things, the way we do government, the way we administer duties and responsibilities of the government, and then we think about the best technology that applies and can advance those targets. So once again, integration, the ecosystem that was raised is very, very, very critical, but ecosystem that involves the vertical and the horizontal.
But even in the context, again, leadership comes to mind because even in Jamaica, the local government level, many of the mayors, by virtue of age and interest, also have that drive and desire to modernize their municipalities. So again, leadership plays an important role, and vision plays an important role in getting things done. and apologies if I had to say, by virtue of their age. You know, there are some persons who are young at heart who like ICTs as well.
And so last question, I mean, the we, how can we, you know, we've heard this morning the University of the UN, I mean, SIA does a lot of communication awareness, e-governance does. How do we go about it? So to, you know, disseminate this knowledge and communication, we should do more than, we've all agreed after 2 panels that needs, you know, more needs to be done throughout the world to the local level. I think you had some ideas, Minerva. Maybe this is a call, you know.
There was actually one slide that I forgot to show you. It says engage. So nobody has a monopoly of solutions. We are experts on economic, political development and other parts of development efforts, but we don't have the entire set of expertise needed to take forward the 20th agenda and the identity specifically. So we have expertise in the room that need to be around the table. So engage with development actors. Right now, probably the people that you see most often in conferences like this are specialists in e-governance or ICTD, but take it beyond that. Take this conference beyond Tallinn. The community is huge. Communities engage in SDG 1 to SDG 17. They need to hear what solutions are possible from this community. And one of the things that, in fact, I wanted to raise was that in 2019, Goal 16 will be reviewed. 16.9 is a critical part of the entire SDGs, so just 16. So we have 2 years ahead of us to frame how efforts can be presented, integrated around the world, and start with engaging in the process. It's a global process, but it goes down to the local level. HLPF happening in July. So starting with the review of how progress is on SDG 1. So don't confine yourself to the community of e-identity, the ICTD community. Where you can have the most impact, in fact, is in communities engaged in SDG 1 to SDG 17. So engage, starting with you and you, are all partners in the room.
Thank you. So if you want to start engaging, are there any questions from the room? Do you have...
Good afternoon. This is Lloyd from the Republic of Namibia. We've spent almost 1.5 days, and I have received very good explanations and actually impressing revolutions, I would say, in respect of the e-governance aspect. But one thing that I have not been well informed of is how these processes that have been adopted were supported by the legal frameworks. What was the call? What was the requirement? How did you go about to empower or to create the framework within which the systems could operate? Because I think that is one of the concerns that, I don't know whether I can speak, but particularly the SADC regions, that we are struggling with, because we understand that we need to move to e-governance, we need to adopt these processes, develop the infrastructure, but guidance in respect of the legal framework, how the legal framework had to adopt to this, would also assist greatly. Thank you.
Do you want to answer, Lloyd?
I can attempt it. So in Jamaica, we've taken 3 different routes. Route 1 is the recognition that in some instances, the laws are there, but subject to interpretation. Route 2 would have been amending the laws, and we have amended a number of laws to facilitate the evolution of the digital society. And Route 3 has been the development of new laws altogether, which would require persons in the legislative space as well as persons in the ICT space to be working together to establishing these new laws. And then we have what we call full consultation, in the sense whereby we ensure that NGOs, international partners, private sector, local government are all part of the negotiation and the discussion and the dialogue process, and all have the opportunity to make an input into whether or not we're changing the laws, or whether or not we're creating new laws, or whether or not we're providing guidelines for the interpretation of existing laws. And those are the three processes that we've been taking, and it has been successful in the sense whereby we've been able to implement a number of policies to meet the needs of the changing net society. The new laws, I must tell you, and this is a recent conversation that I have been having with the Director of Public Prosecution, it's a conversation about the recognition of the evolution of society and the digital society, and a need for laws to be, and the word she used was agile. So the laws need to be as agile as possible to be able to respond to the needs of the burgeoning new society that we have here. I'm sure you've engaged this process in Jamaica.
And just I can add to it. Thank you again for asking this question, because again, for me, this is a critical one. So I should have said, beyond establishing the governance structure of the project, for me, the second priority is a legal framework. So already at the very beginning, when I started back in July last year, the assessment, this is one of the first areas I look at. What are also the laws existing, or what is the state of flux? Because some law or legislation are more important, also like the other one. Yes, obviously there are various laws related to identity through, in fact, issuance of document, or the registry of the civil status of the person. There is nothing usually on EID or number and biometrics. Biometrics is very often critical. So basically, again, what you have to do is to explain to the decision maker, which I did. This is again real story in Jamaica. I said, look, I'm not so concerned about the ICT, the implementation, and the choice of the vendor, would deliver, the solution. My concern, my first one, was about the elapsed time necessary, to develop the new legal framework for national identity, which contain obviously a lot of new stuff, including also, privacy, item and so forth. So when I say also that some laws are also more important than the other one today, I cannot see, the start of a new EID project without addressing, the needs of privacy of the person. But so you need to make sure that whether there is one, or what's happening there. And basically, I explained, to the decision maker, in fact, there is one over there, the Prime Minister, I said, look, this is where you need to put your focus, which he did. So we created a legal working group with representative of all the ministries impacted, by this new project, and also having, the drafter of the Parliament involved into the work at the very beginning, so that when the work was done to say, look, out of the policy, this is what should be done, the drafter was the key person in any country, because he's the one drafting the bill to be presented to the Parliament. They did it in a matter of months. In fact, so at the same time now we are doing the tender to select the vendor. At the same time, the bill is already at the Parliament for final discussion and approval. So that's how, again, you can again gain some time. I was maybe also fortunate in my discovery of the existing framework, that when I discussed with the person in charge of the privacy law, which is not yet voted. In fact, this new one, even though it's an Anglo-Saxon, law environment, but they have decided, to adopt, the new EU, data, protection law.
GDPR.
So again, this is key for me on this type of project, but it requires a lot of focus.
We would need the double of time to continue discussing all the topics around identity, because we haven't had much time to talk about data, protection, privacy, interoperability within APC countries, but also with Europe, the rest of the world. There's so many topics that we could, but we can continue, later on during the day and tonight. There were other questions, or Marie, you wanted to add something on the legal framework?
Maybe just some words. What we always recommend is not to over-regulate. Of course, all government activities have to have legal basis, but we just amended our Population Register Act or Identity Document Act, and you have to keep things open for new developments to regulate with bylaws. And so more important is to regulate, as you mentioned, there's privacy issues and data protection issues. This is more important even in context of EID and in development of trust to EIDs.
Thank you. One more question? I see one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Michael. I work with a private sector technology company by the name of SAP, so something strange in this room probably. And I focus on sub-Sahara Africa. And what I've heard here today, this afternoon, I couldn't agree more to every of your statements, so I totally agree. But in my day-to-day work, and that's more advisory work, so I'm not selling stuff, I'm advising, there is one aspect where I see the risk of missing the goal of inclusion, and that is on the registry. So actually, all of this works once you have the people in the system. All of this works once you have systems in place where you can transfer existing data. But what if, especially in a country with a high growth rate, you cannot enroll people and bring them in the system? And this, from my experience, especially a problem in the rural areas with vulnerable people. So I wonder, to avoid the best practice word, so I wonder if there are any lessons learned or any mistakes or advice that you've seen in your work, how to overcome this problem, how to bring these people in the system more on the analog side.
Bernard?
Yeah, thank you again for this important question. You know, again, I had to do, 3 different studies in Africa, on the problems of civil registry operation. Obviously, we talk about technology, but before talking about technology, we should talk about business processes. Because as you know, what drives your design of the solution is an in-depth analysis of the business processes as they exist today, and as you would like them to be in the future. So when you are already clear on how, again, to collect information on newborns or people, and then officially register, because again, you need to make the difference between collecting information on newborn versus registering, to be compliant also with the legal framework which sustain, this type of activity. So once you have done that, and you look at the difficulty of doing this type of operation in Africa, like for example, I was given an example based on study which were done in Ivory Coast, that one of the difficulty for the citizen in Ivory Coast, in the rural areas, is to go to the building, where the administration sits. Could be 10, 20 kilometers away. So if you have in mind, the fact of designing a citizen-centric operation, then, you reverse the process. So, which means it is the administration which goes to the citizen. Now, a little bit like they have done already in Jamaica, where they already, have put in place, bedside registration. So it means that in the hospital, you have a person of the RGD, the Civil Registry Organization, which is already there to instantly already collect, this information. So I have done recommendation, on certain countries in Africa where you could say, well, you will already send person on the field to collect information that either there is a newborn or very soon there will be a newborn, and you collect, this information through, for me, one of my previous device, these days, which is a tablet. Because tablet is not costly, you can easily develop an application, on it, and also you have wireless connection also now in most of the places. You collect, this information, and then you can properly to register it, with a person, because the law says that only, certain official can register into a book or an e-book, this type of information. You can even, create the process to send back, the certificate, paper certificate, to the original location if you wish, to do so, or find another process. So what I say that these days there are many different solutions which can be used to facilitate this process, which for me are key. I'm also focused on 100% social inclusion when I design, I help to design such system.
That's next month's project.
Thank you very much. I think we are running late. It's a shame. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's
That's
oh, the picture.